Hi, this is the first time I'm using this software, so I'm probably not doing things in the best way, but bear with me. I'm not always going to be looking at the screen because I have a cheat sheet, okay? Just confessing that. I'm going to talk about some things I've learned about breakups with avoidant attachment partners in hopes that it can help anxious attachment partners deal with a breakup better. The no-brainer thing to do, of course, is to not get involved romantically with the avoidants, but they are usually more exciting to us anxious attachment folks. They feel like soulmates for reasons that I don't completely understand, having to do with early amygdala or reptilian brain patterning and trauma bonding. I'm not a professional therapist. I've had experiences with avoidance and read much about it from therapist authors. So if this is useful to you, great. If not, tell me why not. Dan Savage suggests that we lie to a partner at the beginning of a relationship by putting our best self forward and not showing them our shadows. I don't do that. I'm more honest. I show them my shadow, my less shiny parts. And I also usually give them my heart from the beginning, although in my last relationship I was more cautious. I'm not sure about the honest part. There's like another school of thought called radical honesty, but I'm pretty sure now about not giving your heart away so soon before you can trust the avoidant to not pull off the shenanigans that will break your heart. If you are in a new relationship with an avoidant who has not done much inner work on their trauma, they will probably break your heart. So please protect yourself. I'm not saying these things about avoidance because I want to throw them under the bus. Quite the contrary. I still love the avoidants who broke up with me and have much empathy for them and their struggles, and I hope after watching this you would too. As the therapist says to Will in the movie Good Will Hunting, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. He keeps repeating that, Robin Williams. Meaning there is nothing you could have done to prevent your trauma, but there are ways of processing it now in therapy, maybe with a supportive partner, although I'm starting to think that avoidants actually just get triggered by any kind of show of affection that is triggering to them. So maybe it's not the same though for anxious partners. I think anxious partners can benefit from a secure attachment with a partner, but with avoidance, maybe just do therapy and then you might become more secure in your attachment. So avoidants have enmeshment trauma from their childhood. Also chaotic attachment folks who have both avoidant and anxious attachment. We'll talk about anxious attachment in a second. Their caregivers force-fed them or restrained them when they needed to move or watch disturbing movies or had disturbing conversations the avoidants felt obligated to participate in order to belong to the family. Sometimes worse boundary violations like physical abuse or molestation. Or their caregivers just didn't see them as independent beings and projected their own fears and hopes onto them, something a lot of parents do. So now avoidants fear intimacy, though they crave it, being human, or they fear being controlled or having their partners expect something from them. They also can't deal with anger or critique very well, probably because their parents were angry or critiquing of them in a way that felt scary to a young child. If the avoidant attachment is combined with ADD, chances are they are also going to be control freaks because they feel overwhelmed by a world that they are unable to prioritize things in, a world where their basic needs for intimacy was not prioritized and they could do nothing about it. And their overwhelmed shame and powerlessness comes out as trying to control their partners. The lack of resiliency to critique and conflict, which feels like abuse to the avoidants due to their childhood enmeshment trauma. By the way, there's a book called Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman. Check it out. Along with their fear of intimacy and the feeling of being controlled by their partners, makes avoidants want to end the relationship, which they usually do. But ending the relationship by the avoidants feels like abuse to the anxious because it triggers their childhood trauma of being neglected or abandoned by their mother. Problem. It would be great if the anxious partner could learn how to be more secure so they don't ever get angry, but maybe that's not totally reasonable, nor is it totally reasonable to expect the anxious partner to not ask for their relational needs. In a good relationship, the asking can be done gingerly and letting the avoidant partner know that we are aware of their trauma and are working with it, and also to ask them what do they need in order to be able to receive asks. As far as the anxious partner not being triggered by abandonment, we'll talk about that later. The avoidants will use these psycho shenanigans when ending a relationship. They'll claim they are just setting boundaries, or they'll create a provocation, which may cause the anxious partner to get angry, and that can also be used as an excuse to end the relationship because they do not feel safe with anger. Instead of asking for what they need in the relationship, which is what setting boundaries should mean, avoidants just flee and call that setting boundaries. The unsafe feeling is real, but there usually is no objective danger from the anxious partner to the avoidant. The intimacy and sometimes anger just triggers them. They also feel controlled if their partner asks anything of them, like really controlling stuff, like being able to talk about issues and feelings during the relationship, making eye contact during sex or snuggling, a softer landing when breaking up, closure, etc. In some extreme cases, they do not want to meet any of their partner's needs just explicitly. They'll tell them that because that feels controlling and reminds them of childhood enmeshment trauma. But also, they've developed an ideology about how we are not responsible for anybody else's needs. We're only responsible for our own needs. Okay. But we know where it comes from. The ideology just gets overlaid on the trauma. Or they might charge their partner with gaslighting, even if their partner merely disagrees with a philosophical point of view. Gaslighting is a traumatic experience resulting from negating someone's experience and questioning their sanity, not about philosophical disagreements. The avoidants were routinely gaslighted by their caretakers, and now they are projecting those traumas on their partners. Despite all this, our culture assumes that it's okay for anyone, anytime, to just break up and stop communication completely. I want to challenge this cultural assumption. I also want to challenge the assumption that if the anxious partner tells the avoidant partner that this way of breaking up hurts them and tries to reinitiate contact and clear up possible projections and misunderstandings, or reaches out to the avoidance family for help, that they are being abusive. And it's quite adaptive in global capitalism to stop buying or selling if it is in one's best interest. The myth of rational, self-interested actors. But romantic relationships, or in the past tribal relationships, are not and should not be transactional, where they could be ended abruptly on the whim of someone who seeks control of their partner and their out-of-control inner world by fleeing, and then projects control onto their partner. Tribal cultures understood interdependence, where self-interest is synonymous with staying connected to other members of the tribe, and the importance of healthy romantic relationships for the health of the tribe. We, on the other hand, don't need each other for our material survival. We only need the global economy for that. And the global economy does not care about our individual, family, or tribal health, only about control of resources and people, who also are seen as resources. So we need to go back to the tribal or village ethic, supporting romantic relationships and not making it easy to detach, unless there is actual abuse going on. In the book Passionate Marriage, Dr. Schnarch suggests resisting the temptation to flee and that maturity involves staying and dealing with the discomfort. I think this should be generalized to relationships where there has not been formal commitment yet, but there has been exchange of intense energy. A romantic relationship requires consent, but once it exists, especially once sexual and emotional energies have been exchanged, there is a responsibility to the other person, not just to yourself. Responsibility means checking in with the other person about what is going on for both of you, discussing it and proceeding bilaterally, not unilaterally, caring about both your needs. It doesn't necessarily mean staying in the relationship, but it does mean not just cutting off communication for an indefinite amount of time, especially when your partner has an anxious attachment style, because this activates their abandonment trauma, or sometimes existential trauma if they're older, which is something I'll talk about later. I've had one partner who broke up with me and was able to maintain a loving, mutually supportive friendship, but that is rare. It's interesting that our culture does acknowledge the responsibility of parents to not abandon their children, but not the responsibility of partners to not abandon each other. I think this is one missing link to a better culture, which most therapists don't talk about, with a few exceptions like Schnark, Tatkin, and the author of freetoattach.com. They give all kinds of advice about how the anxious or avoidant person can do therapy. No surprise there, but they are mute about how we need to encourage better breakup etiquette and better support from friends, family, community to the couple to possibly keep them together, but not necessarily, just to be more gentle with each other. Now, I want to say something about abandonment trauma for anxious folks. The panic can come from early childhood trauma or from the existential fear of not having meaning. The early childhood trauma might come from being abandoned, though often it is less severe things like being weaned abruptly from breastfeeding, not being picked up when one is hungry or wet, or just needing mom. But to the infant, it felt like abandonment. One thing that helped me a bit is to recognize that the panic is not about objective survival in the present, though it may have felt that way when I was a child or baby, and to imagine giving that infant the care it needs now, telling him that the adult that is me is not abandoning him. The existential trauma is about what gives our lives meaning, and it becomes more important as we grow older, seeing our death in view and wanting our life to not be in vain. Since supporting a partner gives meaning and has given meaning for millions of years in our evolutionary past, we probably develop neural circuits that seek meaning from partnership, and also from procreation, obviously. But it's more than that. Reciprocal support in a partnership enhances the other meanings in one's life, and without the partnership or some substitute for it, such as progeny or pets, people can get existentially depressed. What has helped me is to realize that there are still ways I want to help our species enjoy little pleasures, solve great mysteries with science, and commune with other beings who are not necessarily my lover, such as friends, forests, rivers and mountains, dogs, cats, and goats. What gives your life meaning besides having a partner? It's okay to get meaning from having a partner, by the way, but if you're not having a partner right now, try to find some meaning without your partner. Another thing that helped me was using an entheogen with the intention of healing this abandonment trauma. Most of it just felt good in my body, or reclaim my right to feel good and connected to nature and loved ones. And the only concept that stayed with me was that suffering, whether my own or witnessing others, will always transform into bliss if I just stay with, process it, and don't try to flee from it. I do think that for anxious people, it also helps to heal by having a secure attachment with a partner. The last thing I want to share is a piece of an encouraging song which I adapted from Stan Rogers called The Mary Ellen Carter. Just a piece of it. It's about a ship that went down upon hitting some shoals, rocks, and then was resurrected by the crew later, despite much cost to them because they loved the ship and did not give up on it, despite the owners giving up on it since they had insurance. If you feel so depressed upon breaking up, if your abandonment trauma is so strong, then this song, this piece of a song, is for you. And you to whom adversity has dealt the final blow, with avoidance, sweeties, leaving you everywhere you go. Turn to and put out all your strength of arm and heart and brain, and like the Mary Ellen Carter, rise again, rise again, rise again. Though your heart it be broken or life about to end, no matter what you've lost, be it a home, a love, a friend,